Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. I'm your host, CK Sims, and today we are joined by Dolores Fazzino. Did I get it right? I did.
You
right?
did. Thank you.
So Dolores is a nurse practitioner. DNP is Doctor of Naturopathy?
No, Doctorate of Nursing Practice.
Doctorate of Nursing Practice. Oh, okay. But don't be fooled, because she's so much more than what her title suggests. So, Dolores, I make a habit of not investigating people before, just before we meet, really. And the reason I do that is because when I investigate people before, my wheels start turning, and all of a sudden I think of all of these questions that I want to ask. And then what happens is then the conversation stops being a conversation and it really becomes an interview. And it's like, here's your question, give me the answer. Here's your question, give me the answer. I like to be surprised. So 20 minutes before we started, I started going through your things. And I'm like, this is really interesting. So tell us about you. Tell us about what it is you do.
Well, geez, CK, this is like the $1 million question. It's kind of a loaded one, too. I do a lot of things. I have been in the healthcare industry for well over 45 years. I know I look good for my age. I started when I was a child, only joking. But I've been in the healthcare industry, and I've been bridging the physical with the spiritual and the visible with the invisible. And people are like, how the heck do you do that? And how did you get into that? So I'm going to just share a little bit about my background, because I feel that this is a real good foundational piece as to how everybody has their story and those, I want to say, pivotal moments in their life where their trajectory changes to something different. So I'm a product of the 60s. I was born in the late 1950s. And I was born an empath, intuitive, and highly sensitive person. And for people who don't know what that is, I feel things at a very deep level, and I feel vibration and frequency. Now, when you're born into a family that didn't know what to do with all of this, it's like they tried to put you in a box. Okay. So with that being said, my mom was a product of an alcoholic household. When she grew up, her father was an alcoholic. So for her, anytime when there was something painful happening, her MO was to ignore it. It'll go away. And that's what she used to tell me. It's like, oh, you're feeling things too much. Just ignore it. It'll go away. But when you tell that to an empath, an intuitive, and a highly sensitive person, guess what happens? It doesn't go away. It gets bigger. So I would share that with her. And so in our household, since I wasn't allowed to feel, I actually gravitated towards music, and I became very, very proficient at playing the clarinet. And actually, I was on a pathway to become a concert clarinetist, which is kind of interesting because in my junior year, that all changed. Also, in tandem, what was going on in my childhood, my dad had back surgery in the mid-1960s and developed a hospital-acquired infection, which pretty much almost put him on his deathbed. He was in the hospital for over 2 months. He did survive. However, whenever his immune system started getting compromised, what would happen is that the infection would start all over again, and he would develop abscesses throughout his abdomen and have to go in the hospital, have major surgery to get that out, and be on just be in the hospital for 2 months at a time. So that happened not only one time, it happened 4 times between 1970 and 1975. So my childhood was like this emotional roller coaster. I didn't know if my father was going to, be able to come home from the hospital alive, because he was on his deathbed every single time. By the fourth time that this happened, so we're in 1975, the CAT scanner got introduced as a modern piece of technology in Western medicine. So they put my dad underneath the CAT scanner, and lo and behold, they were able to determine that where his issues were coming from was stemming from where he had his previous back surgery 10 years prior in 1966. And their solution for this was that he was going to have a major back surgery, which in 1975 was in its neophyte stages of development. It was called a spinal fusion. And it came with a real high percentage of either being paralyzed, you might die, maybe you get better, maybe not. My mom was at her wit's end with all of this. And she had really been disenchanted with what Western medicine had been offering, and she was looking for alternatives. So at the same time, and you have to realize that this is 1970s, this is not 1990, 2000, 2020. We didn't have the computer, WebMD, or anything. We had the National Enquirer and other things that people looked at to get their information. And it just so happened that in the National Enquirer, there was a feature article that was being written up about a man who was a minister from Cairo, Michigan, the name of Reverend Alex Holmes, who had the gift of laying on of hands. And he was being written up as a feature article because he was assistive in helping his brother heal from leukemia. So my mom was all over this like bread on butter. My dad, not so much. He was the biggest skeptic you'd ever want to see. My mom shared this information with my dad in the hospital when he was there. And my dad said, only if my surgeon says it's okay, then he could come. So my mom marched out to the nurse's station. And it just so happened my dad's physician was sitting there, the surgeon. And she shared the information with the surgeon. She said that I'm thinking about having a spiritual healer coming in to help my husband with his health condition. Would that be okay? Surgeon's writing, doesn't miss a beat, looks up at her and said, sure, that's fine. So my mom got the blessing from the doctor, told my father. My father agreed to have the minister come in. Not 10 minutes went by. My mom went back out to the same nurse's station, same doctor sitting there, and shared the updated version, the news with the surgeon. She said, my husband agreed to have the spiritual healer come in. And the surgeon looked up at her and said, what are you talking about? I never agreed to that. So this is where those God moments come in. And of course, my mom didn't share that piece of information with my father. A month later, Reverend Holmes came to our home in Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut. I now live in Southern California. And my siblings, my brother and two sisters, and my two grandmothers were there, and my parents and Reverend Holmes. And I just remember meeting Reverend Holmes for the first time, and he was this most humble and gracious man that I've ever met. And there was just something about his essence that was just very captivating to me. And I don't know how he knew this, but my dad had one leg that was shorter than the other. We all knew this because my dad had a lift in his shoe, but my dad was barefoot and his shoes were nowhere in sight. So when my dad sat down, he instructed my father to lift both his legs. And sure enough, when he lifted both his legs, you could see a 1-inch gap. He put a book underneath the longer leg. And then he had my dad lower his legs, and he said some prayers over my father. He touched my dad's solar plexus, which is like your belly button area, and the top of his head, said some prayers, quoted some scriptures from the Bible, and then he instructed my father to put both his feet up, and they were both the same length. In that moment, my life changed forever because I was on the pathway to become a concert clarinetist, and I knew that it was my mission in this lifetime to bridge the physical with the spiritual and the invisible with the visible. Now, my dad, being the skeptic, he had to believe that something was actually happening, was crying and sobbing like a baby like I never witnessed in my lifetime, because he needed to see evidence that something was actually happening for him to believe. More prayers were said over my father for the next half hour, and then he was instructed to go lie down because, as we know, when any massive energy work is done on a person, it's like a big computer. We're a computer, we get an upgraded program. We have to reboot the computer to integrate that program. Just like when we do energy work on people, you need to reboot our physical body to recalibrate to a higher frequency. So my dad slept for over 24 hours. A month later, he returned to the same CAT scanner and they showed no evidence of the infection. My dad never had to have the surgery that we were dreading, and he never had to revisit that problem again in his lifetime. And he passed away about 11 years ago at the age of 80. So talk about pivotal moments, talk about crazy making things. And this was considered quackery back in the 1975.
Well, I think, and I'm just going to be honest with you, I think it's still considered quackery to a degree today.
To a degree, but it's better.
It is better. You know, Dolores, I have goosies, and I'm going to tell you why.
Yes.
This podcast is about you, but there's some weird things. So, I too played clarinet.
Oh.
I wasn't on track to becoming a concert clarinetist, but that was my instrument of choice, and piano. And so I have so many questions too. Okay, so I'm going to go through this quickly. When I was in kindergarten, I jumped out of a moving vehicle. That was one time. And then a second time, I was being a little shit, as I was as a child. And I missed the bus on purpose because I wanted to hang out with my brother and his friend. And then I had to get a ride to school with my brother's friend's father and the two of them. And the father had said to my brother, "You get in after Curtis because the door is heavy and needs to be closed hard." And I'm Curtis, that's my full name, but CK. And I was a little shit and fought with my brother, and he gave up the ghost, if you will, and got in the vehicle, and I closed the door. And this is back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So seatbelts weren't as big a deal back then at that time.
Yeah.
So we're just driving to school, and there's in this town that we were living in, it was like a big sort of bend, but it was a turn, but it was wide. So you didn't really have to slow down, and there wasn't a stop sign. As the car was moving around that stop sign, the door flung open, and little CK flew out at probably about 45, 50 kilometers. So 25, 30 miles, I think, is how that works. And, anyway, long story short, my mom noticed after a while that I had a limp in I don't remember which leg, right leg. And she took me to a hospital, and the hip bone had sort of displaced from the socket and had begun to deteriorate. So off to the big city and all of that stuff. These braces that you have to put on, it was like a triangle. It was a whole ordeal. Anyway, I was always a little shit, even in this brace. And my mother, and I hope swear words don't bother you, but
Oh, not at all.
but my mother, she was a primary caregiver. My dad was working, so
Okay.
I hated this thing, right? Like I hated it so much, and I kept taking it off. But you have to understand that it was a steel metal thing with boots, and there was about 20 little straps that were like belts going off each side. So my mother would put it on, and then I would immediately take it off the second she turned around. And I remember vividly, I had to be in that brace for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
That's how long they anticipated it would take to heal or rectify the damage. And I think I was in it about a year, a little over a year. But I wasn't, because I kept taking it off. And anyway, I remember my mom getting so frustrated one day because she had to keep putting it back on. And one day she got really just overwhelmed. And I think about it now and I feel so bad for her because that was a lot. And she just took the brace and she says, "I can't do this anymore." And she stuck it behind the chair that was in the corner. It was a big, hefty chair. And she looked to the sky, and my parents are ministers. And she said, "God, I give this to you. I cannot do this anymore." And so she prayed, and the church prayed, and she put me on prayer list and phone list. I don't know if you're religious, but this is how it was. And then not that many months later, I had come back from school, was going to walk up the stairs, and my mom noticed something
Oh,
and
wow.
said, "Stop, turn around, walk back towards the kitchen." And I do not lie when I tell you that she must have made me walk back and forth that living room 50 times that day.
Yeah,
There was no limp.
that's
And so she
cool.
took me back in to see the I got goosies. So she
Yeah,
took me back in to see the specialist. Specialist didn't make sense. And they did the work, they did the x-rays, all of that sort of thing. And there was no evidence
yeah,
that there had ever been an issue whatsoever. And
cool.
they couldn't explain it. And my mom looked at them, and she's told this story in church many, many times. She looked at them. There might not be evidence on your medical papers, but the evidence is in God's name.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
that's so crazy to me that the intersections, right?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
talking about that, and it happens to be a pastor, and you were talking about God. So, like, your father witnessed a miracle, you witnessed a miracle,
absolutely. I
and
did.
that changed the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely.
So,
Without a doubt.
I,
He's all over this. He's like,
I,
and this one's for you. It says stay wild.
I love this. Yes. Why would you say that? Because I was wild as a child?
No, because you were sharing, sure. It's just
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's,
I
I
was
appreciate that.
I was definitely a wild child. So your work has been a physical, spiritual,
Right.
visible, and invisible. Would you say that God is still a component of your
Oh,
work today?
absolutely. 100%. You call it
I love
God, higher source, spirit, whatever it is. Yeah. There's something beyond me that's assisting.
this is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so your father was healed. I'm going to get back to the Dr. Dolores now. I have to share that with you. So your father was healed, and you knew in that moment that you had to spend your life
Yeah,
bridging the gap.
and it was interesting because you figure, I graduated from nursing school way back in, I went to nursing school in 1977. So back then it was like, all right, so become a nurse. And, everywhere you go, here you are. You know what I'm saying? It's just like people think that, oh, if I change and go someplace else, I'll be something different. No, everywhere you go, here you are. And so, that's who you are. So when you show up in different realms or different, opportunities or school and stuff like that, that intuitive ability, those were my gifts coming into this world. So I had that. So just even working, in the floors and in surgery, all these years in the ICU, I mean, I would know things before they were actually going to happen. And so what would happen for some of the doctors, they were like, well, how did you know this? Because I could just feel what was going on energetically with a person. And energy is like a language, okay, in itself. Some people are very fluent in it, like it's a second language to them. And some people, they're totally oblivious. It's like, the difference between being able to be um, fluent in a language like Russian versus, whatever. That's what it's like when you're able to read energy. And that's why they call me an energy whisperer, because it's like, I could see the physical, but I also feel the emotions, the beliefs, the um, what people are thinking sometimes, what they are feeling, whether or not they're connected to their body, and where the misalignments are. So that's all the stuff that's underneath the iceberg, so to say, because the iceberg is what we could see. Underneath the iceberg, there's still a component of what is part of the iceberg, but it's not seen, it's unconscious, right? And it's kind of running the show of that visible part of the iceberg. It's kind of, moving the iceberg around.
And it's kind of like this stuff, and it's only been in recent years that I've started to sort of explore it, is how we hold on physically to trauma
Oh my
and
god.
where that lives in our bodies.
Oh, absolutely. There's so
Right.
much there's so much of that, that is, I think that is like the gold nugget that's going to be the gateway to healing people because, in Western medicine, and I could say this, is that we've been trained to look at symptoms, give a pill, do a procedure, and be on your merry way. And I knew, I would say halfway through my career that we were doing a huge disservice to people, especially when, I was working in the surgical realm, which I still do on a part-time basis as an assistant surgeon. So I'm actually assisting on surgical procedures as a nurse practitioner with the physician. But I've noticed that we would have cancer patients come in that would have, say for an example, somebody came in with a with a breast cancer, have to have a mastectomy, and then they do chemo and radiation, and then they'd be back in like 18 months, 2 years with a recurrence. And I'm like, why is this happening? Because I'll tell you why. We never really looked at the underlying issues that contributed to the disease. Okay. We just did the superficial slap a band-aid on. Now we're ripping it off. So it's like felt we were doing a huge disservice to our clients because we were not looking at the deeper causes or the root causes as to why this was so. And so, I've witnessed in Western medicine, now people are going into integrative things where they're finding the more physical root cause instead of the emotional, mental, spiritual aspects. So they're going deeper into the physical, but still not addressing those other aspects as well as they could be.
And I think that that's so interesting too, because I think I say a lot of people, I really don't know if a lot of people, I just assume maybe a lot of people understand now that modern medicine and medicine as it is typically looks and tries to cure the sickness, but not what's causing the sickness.
Correct.
Right? It's a very,
Yeah.
not, I don't want to say superficial, but surface level sort of diagnostic scheme. You have cancer, we're going to throw chemo, radiation,
Right.
things like that. Why do you have cancer? Or, you have migraines and headaches. Well, here's this medication that's going to help keep those controlled and like help you get on with your life. But why are you having migraines and headaches?
Exactly.
What is that? What's a physiological reason that this is happening?
Right.
And also maybe the spiritual and mental reasons as well.
Oh, absolutely. And and I want to add one other thing, CK, too. It's like how many people, okay, just an example, people with diabetes, okay, that's like the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so Western medicine thinks that they could treat everybody the same with their diabetes and have the same result. Now, the big misnomer is what's below the surface of that iceberg. How people created that for themselves is so unique to that individual, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that could be a one and done, that you can't treat everybody the same way because the way that they got to the end result is way different. So I think that sometimes that's why some things will work for some people and some things will not work for other people because of the underlying things below the surface and how they got to that endpoint. I mean, it might have been that they don't experience their emotions, or they have these beliefs. A lot of times we look at family stuff. There's a lot of ancestral stuff that comes through our lineage that we take on as our truth. And in essence, it's not our truth at all. But
Mm-hmm.
it's projected onto us and we become that. So it's really about being aware and mindful of some of these things and not taking on the family disease, if they call it that, because we know that the power of the mind and the power of our will, okay, some people will not create heart disease, even though it's a family genetic trait, or create diabetes. So it's looking at that aspect of it. Just because, you are prone to that doesn't necessarily mean that you could own it and create it for yourself, not unless you want to. You know what I'm saying? So it's like
Fair.
whatever you focus your attention on, you're going to create, right?
I
So,
think I agree with that, and because I
yeah,
think manifestation works both ways.
absolutely.
People hear manifestation and they always think the positive, but no. But if you're putting negative in the world, that's what you're going to attract.
Yep.
one thing that just popped in my head was that you didn't get diabetes because you ate too much sugar, right? And this is a common misconception.
Right.
Diabetes typically comes from, how I understand it, a comorbidity, if you will,
Hmm.
something else not functioning the right way. And
Correct.
then you get it. I have type 2 diabetes. I got diagnosed in 2019. I take one medication for it, but I also changed my lifestyle. And here's the thing. I went to the doctor about a year and a half ago, and my blood sugars are perfect.
Good.
And she's like, we need to reduce your medication. And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, because your blood pressures are perfect. But does that mean they're working? Like, if the medication and my blood sugars are working, does that mean they're working? Why would we take me off a medication that's working if it's working? So I kiboshed that, and I just said, I'm like, we're going to keep things exactly as they are for now, and then we'll
Yeah,
check,
exactly. Yeah.
like, try to, like, let's reduce your medication so maybe your blood sugars go up, and then we have to add it back to you. No, we're
No.
gonna
And
chill out.
CK, good for you for like honoring that within yourself and speaking up for yourself.
Yeah, I think that there's so much I could probably tell you, but we don't have that much time. But yeah, that didn't happen naturally, because how you weren't able to feel in your household growing up, I too, it's not that I wasn't able to feel, I wasn't able to express. So I
Um,
believed that my voice was powerless. And
okay.
that was the faulty assumption that I built my life on for so
Yeah.
many years. Not necessarily something I hold my parents accountable for anymore.
Yeah.
We do the best that we can. They weren't abusive. It was just, that was the situation. So, like, I think for a really long time, and I think still to this day, there are things held in the body for me, but I've done the work. So being able to go in and say to my doctor, no, if I'm actually tracking healthy at this moment, we're not
Hmm.
going to be changing anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
If it's not broken, we don't fix it.
well, this is just it. And then maybe one day, if maybe we'll do a quarter of a decrease
Yeah.
just to see if I'm able to maintain my sugars, but like not an immediate, like, oh, your sugars are good, let's decrease your medication. I always found that really annoying. But medications in general, right? So like the other side of it is over medicating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I advocate there as well. And I'm like, no, that's not happening either. I don't
Mhm.
need cholesterol. I am still within range. We will
Yeah.
keep checking.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that was a pharmacist telling me that, you're of this age and you're diabetic, so you need to be on a cholesterol medication.
No, you don't.
And so I said, and the doctor had said the same thing to me. And I was like, and I was just in the higher part of the range, not
Yeah.
out of range, the
Yeah.
higher part. I was like, nope, not happening. When my blood work comes back and I am beyond the range, we
Yeah.
can have a conversation about it. But
Absolutely.
until that
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
not happening.
Well, you know
So
what? And I'm going to just add this. So you're aware, okay? You're awake and aware. How many people out there would not even have that conversation and just say, okay, fine. They give their power away to that. And it could be the worst thing that they could be doing for themselves,
love
right?
that. I
Yeah.
love that. And we are going to take a break. Can't believe 30 minutes is already fast. We'll be right
Life in Stitches by CK Sims. Available for purchase in paperback and ebook on all major platforms. Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Poddin My Noggin again this week. We are here having a fabulous conversation with Dr. Dolores Fazzino. She is a doctored nurse practitioner and a nurse practitioner, spiritual intuitive, and energy whisperer with over 45 years of experience in the healthcare industry, and is known for helping people achieve healing in unconventional ways. So we've been talking about some of these unconventional ways, but like let's dive a little bit deeper. So what are some ways? Like, do you have like scenarios that you could
Well,
share?
this one kind of comes to mind that I'll just share something from my vault, if you want to call it that. Um, being an intuitive and, helping people try to figure out what's going on. I had a client a few years ago who was on the waiting list for getting a liver transplant because he had hepatitis C and had gone through all the conventional treatment to possibly reverse that, and it wasn't working. And so he was on the transfer list. And the family reached out to me, and I worked with him. And it was interesting because when I tapped into his energy, I knew that it was actually part of his karma to receive an organ from another person. It was a gift from another lifetime. The guy, the donor, the patient wasn't going to know, but I knew it was like a payback of karma from a different time and place. And so what was interesting was that we would get this phone call that there was a liver available. The patient would go to the hospital to get worked up in the 11th hour. It was a mismatch. And this had happened about 3 times, probably over a period of months. And the patient, my client was starting to get a little, antsy about it. And I tried to, I tapped into why this was so. And when I tapped into him from a energetic standpoint and from what I could see in his physical body, believe it or not, we have channels between our organ systems. We have an input and an output within each organ system to another organ system, and they're all interconnected like a matrix. And what I was able to see was that he had a blockage from his heart to the liver and from the liver to the heart. And I just sat with that, and I was able to decipher. I said, there's something around, I'm feeling like unforgiveness that's blocking, because there was like a lot of anger with this whole thing, and that blocks the flow of your energy and chi. So I had asked him, I said, I'm feeling that you're holding something really heavy in your heart, and I feel like something that you may consider doing some forgiveness work on. And he just busted and started sobbing. And so I knew this was true. And I said, I'm going to invite you to go and do some forgiveness work on this, and I'll help you with this as well. And let's see what happens. He did that. A week later, he ends up getting the liver, and he's been fine ever since. So what I'm saying is that sometimes the things that we need to do within ourselves is also part of the process. And I think energetically, by him being able to do forgiveness work, open the channels and allow energetically the right opportunity to come for him to receive that liver so he can move on with his life.
Wow. And so, okay, how does one tap into this? Like when you say that, it sounds like an action, but like, is it observing? Is there touch involved?
No, this is all virtual because he was in Colorado and I was in Southern California. So it's just, for me, it's like one of my gifts is that I'm able to tap into the energy. If a person starts talking, it's like I get like pictures sometimes, or I get these feelings, but it's like I'm reading energy as it's coming through the phone, basically. And for some people, it's like, and I'm going to give an example. Many of us have walked into rooms and we could feel what has transpired in there before. Sometimes there's like an essence. Okay. So that's like what energy is like. Energy is always there. and it's like radio waves. You and I are looking at each other now. We're energy, but we're a denser demonstration of it. We are more solid, if you want to call it dense like. But if you were to go under a high powered microscope, you're going to see moving particles. That's energy. Thoughts, beliefs, whether or not we're connected to our body, whether or not you're connected to a higher self or God, that's all energy as well. And you're able to, but it's radio waves. So it's like stuff that you cannot see because it's less dense. Okay. It's frequency, energy. And
Stuff that people feel.
yeah, sometimes you can feel it and sometimes you can't. But just because you can't feel it doesn't mean it's not there. Okay. It's not black and white. It's like the shades of gray in between. So when somebody starts talking to me, I feel a bunch of stuff and I could sense stuff. And sometimes I get an intuitive hit and I always ask permission to share it. It's just like, I would say, have you ever considered blah, blah, blah? Or what does blah, blah, blah mean to you? And sometimes it's just like hitting it on the head, the nail on the hammer on the nail. And it's just like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I didn't even think of that. So it's not very black and white. There's lots of shades of gray with it, but that's how it kind of works for me.
So,
all right. What are you going to say?
I was led to believe that was a trauma response for me. Okay. A therapist told me once that I was hypervigilant. I can detect the slightest change in a person, even if they're trying hard to be okay. It doesn't have to physically read. I can feel it happen. I can typically tell within max 5 minutes if someone has good or bad energy.
Hell yeah.
And I always say that because it's the trust your gut thing. I learned to lean in and trust my gut, my intuition, and what it tells me.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm like, okay. I didn't have that before. It took a lot of work on so many different areas of my life to do that. But I have believed always. There was a part of me, because I'm super into witchy stuff, love witchy stuff. Anything witchy, I'm like all over it. But so there was always a part of me ever since I was a child where I thought that I was a witch, or I wanted to be a witch. And I'm going to give you this really weird example. I can't believe I tell you this, but my best friends would be able to tell you that there's some truth to it, but it has to be some sort of coincidental anomaly, right? I noticed in my 20s that I could be driving in my car and streetlights would go.
Oh.
And I remember noticing it, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, I might have just watched The Craft or whatever it was. And I'm like, that's, my divine energy playing.
Yeah.
But then I actually started noticing it happening regularly.
Oh, interesting.
And I remember the first time I told my best friend of 25 years, Cindy, this is years ago, we're looking at 20 years, maybe, well, just under 20 years now ago when this would have happened. And we were driving along in the street light. And I was like, did you see that? And she was like, what? And I'm like, did you see the street light go out? She's like, no. I'm like, oh, that's a thing. That happens. And she's like, what? I'm like, and I explained it to her.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have no control over it, but it will often happen when I'm just driving somewhere or even just walking. And she asked me, what do you think it is? After many years of witnessing it happening, I'm like, I think I'm a witch. Or I have, I don't know, something electromagnetically whatever is messing with the sensors in those streetlights to turn them off. I don't know. And then my best friend, he's of shorter time, has also witnessed this. I just, so is it power of suggestion? So I overanalyze everything. So is it power of suggestion because I pointed it out? But they'll notice if we're driving or walking somewhere, the light just goes out overhead. So, but I always believed, even though part of me just wished I was, witchy and powerful, was led to believe that it's a trauma response, and hypervigilance is my ability to pick up and detect all the smallest, minute changes in a person's like physical appearance, energy, the way they talk, their breathing, their movements, their eye movements, all of those things. And so as a leader and someone who works within consulting, it's really important for me when I actually training people for their cameras to be on,
Yeah.
because I can tell just by their nonverbal cues
Oh,
if they're processing
absolutely.
information, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just find so like what you're describing as your lifelong working gifts,
Mm-hmm.
I've thought it's trauma response.
Well, you know what? I'm going to invite you to look at it differently because
Okay.
I think you're an intuitive, highly sensitive person and an empath. You're all three of
I
those?
would describe myself as that way, but I would also say I would always go back up and say, but I think it's because, of trauma.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. I think you came into this world that way. And it's a good thing. And I'll tell you why, because it's about, and you're an alchemist, okay? You're an alchemist. But also the energy thing, I know of that. And it's like your energy field is expansive and it has a lot with electromagnetic things. Some people, my mom was one of these people, she would wear a regular watch, like the wind up ones, and it would stop and she could never use it again. She's had numerous ones of those during her life. So some people have a different electromagnetic field where their energy is expanded and it does wonky things. Sometimes when our frequencies get we get a download, or sometimes this happens when I'm talking with people and we're talking a lot of spiritual and high vibrating things, the computer will go out because energetically it's a different frequency than what is there. Do you understand?
I
So
do.
it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just what it is. This is what CK is made up of. And, the trauma response thing, well, that could have happened. Maybe there was a trauma that actually triggered this gift that allowed you to have it now. So I wouldn't say it as a trauma response as a bad thing. It's actually sometimes the traumas that we have in our lives open up the door for us to go to the next part of our life. It's like you're getting upgraded, or whenever something kind of not so great happens to people or even myself, I always say I'm getting upgraded because I am, because
Interesting.
it's no longer an energetic alignment for where I'm at. Okay. And sometimes our natural tendency is to think, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. And you're hanging on to it for dear life. And it's just like, it's old energy, honey. Let go of it. Let go, because something even better is coming, because we've outgrown this. Okay. Be it a work thing, a relationship, anything in our life. We have energetically outgrown it. And by us clinging to it is doing a huge disservice for us, because the universe is wanting to show you where you're going. And sometimes, you just have to allow things to fall away and not be so resistant to change. We have to remember that people and things are in our life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Some things we're not meant to hang on to forever. It's just for whatever reason it is. And, we're in a very interesting time in humanity's evolution where, it's just like we have the black and white thinking. It's like the real fear based stuff and the love based stuff. So if you have been here and you've been focusing on this stuff and creating from here where all this low vibrating and negative stuff is, and you're evolving and going over to here, guess what? It's an energetic misalignment. You can't take what you created here out of fear to where we're going to create out of love and prosperity and abundance and community. So
I
that's what we're
believe.
witnessing right now. That's what we're witnessing right now and living through, right?
Yes, well, and I'm hoping that the love side wins.
It's going to.
It's going to, I believe it
It's
too,
going to.
but I hope the love side wins. It's so, yeah, so trauma response for sure is how I labeled it
Yeah.
and all.
Yeah.
At age 35 for me, I had a big sort of pivotal point in my life. And I've talked about it on the podcast before, but it was at that point, coming through that, that I realized that my intuition and the way my brain works, because I always felt, my brain didn't work the atypical or traditional way, if you will.
Mm.
And I fought against them for like 35 years.
Yeah.
Well, I realized that they were actually just how my brain works and how I process information or see things. And so to stop fighting and to lean in and,
Mm.
and embrace them. And I can't tell you exactly what you just said. It's the transformation from 35-year-old CK to 43-year-old CK
Mm-hmm.
is like a completely different person.
And
But like this feels like who I always was meant to be. Like I
yeah.
feel at home more
Yep.
in my body than I ever have in my life. And
Congratulations.
yeah, it's a really cool thing. So like if people are at home listening, and I'm sure we're gonna have people too who are gonna be, what was it? What was the word you used? Cackery?
The what?
Wackery was
Oh,
what you
quackery.
said.
Considering this quackery, yeah. Well,
And I don't. And I think it's because I found so much truth and home in leaning into energy. And I
yeah.
believe that we are all energy. I believe that prayer is energy.
Yes, it
And when
is.
you have prayer groups come together and you have all of these people from around the world focusing their energy in on a person or a thing, that is enough energy to create miracles and heal, right?
Absolutely. I
So
totally agree. And of course, Western medicine would say this is not evidence based, but you know what? Some things we know are true. We just do not have the technology at this time to measure that truth, but it's the
it's true.
truth. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Which I find a little strange that we can't measure it yet, but we can make potentially new dimensions from CERN with the particle accelerator. So
You
I'm
just
like,
buckle your seatbelts, honey. It's going to get even more interesting in the next
oh,
50 years.
I really do. It's funny because like I've never been someone who's like a conspiracy theorist prior in my life, and I'm not really now. But there are some theories out there that you have to stop and pause and be like, well, how else do we explain this current state that we are in?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's so turbulent in this moment and it's so divisive in this moment because we are on the precipice of a massive change
Oh,
forward.
absolutely.
So I'm excited but also terrified. So we'll
Well,
see.
I'm gonna offer my 2 cents on that too, because I feel that, so much light is being shown onto planet Earth right now that the things that were always there, but we didn't see, it's like
Mhm.
now a big beacon of light is being shown on that. So it's the same analogy like the stuff that has always been there, but in our world, unconscious. The big beam is being shown on the unconscious, it's moving to consciousness. Light is being shown on the dark area, moving into what we could see. Now, when it's like when a big light is being shown in the dark spaces, people start freaking out because they're seen now, where had they had been running the show, covertly or unconsciously or whatever, and it's time to, once you see something, now you could do something with it. So the illusion is that there's a lot of chaos going on in our external world because of all of that. This is true.
It always was there.
Yeah, it was always there, but now it looks like it's amplified because it's really being seen. Okay. How people could come to some, I want to say, peace within themselves is learning how to come within themselves and creating the certainty that they have within themselves when you're in the spin cycle in the washing machine and all hell is breaking loose. It's just like you don't have to be a part of that. It's a choice. It's about coming within to yourself, learning how to trust your intuition and trust your gut like you talked about, because this is where you're going to find your certainty that's unique to you. It's not going to be the certainty that's unique to your spouse, your significant other, your kids, but for you.
Yeah.
And this is how you create certainty in an uncertain world. It's like you come within, listen, do mindful activity. Mindful activity is the gateway to get you into your body so you could be in the present moment. And it doesn't have to look like sitting in lotus position chanting Om. That's like a structured form of mindful activity. Mindful activity is anything that will allow you to lose all sense of time and place. We've
Mm,
all had those moments where you get into a hobby and it's like you're doing this and it seems like 5 minutes go by and 4 hours went by.
yes.
That's a mindful activity. So for some people, gardening is a mindful activity. It's allowing you to be in the present moment where you're right here, right now, and an all time is like obsolete. For some people, it's like doing a sport. For some people, for me, for an example, doing a road trip for 8 hours is a mindful activity for me.
For me, reading.
Okay, so there you go. And it's about allowing yourself to go to those mindful activities because this is where you're going to get anchored in the present moment. When you're in the present moment, you are able to hear the subtle voices within you, your intuition, because your intuition is not going to say, hey, CJ, blah, 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 blah. It's going to be that subtle feeling and knowing that
Yes.
sometimes if you're not still enough, you're going to miss it.
I love that. And it's the mindfulness that you're talking about. And the other part is trusting yourself,
Exactly.
right? They're
Total
one and the
trust.
same, but it's coming into your body and learning to trust yourself. That's your certainty. So you have written books
Yes, I
for
have.
people who want to read. So your books, well, you also have your own podcast.
I do. It's called The Dr. Dolores Show. It's on Inspired Choices Network out of Canada. And it airs every Wednesday at high noon um, Pacific Standard Time. And we broadcast to over 400 platforms internationally. So you'll be able to find it on any type of
I'm totally
platform.
going
Yeah.
to that one.
Yes,
I don't
please
listen to
do.
podcasts often, but I think I want to listen to yours. So one of the books is your amazing itty bitty healing in ways you never thought possible book. So it's
Yes.
15
So
key
this one
steps to
here,
manifest.
let me see if I could do that
That one
without
there.
it. Yep. And so
Absolutely.
this one is a very short read. It's probably 60 pages, but it's bullet points and it's about key steps that you could use to help you manifest more true health and lasting wellness in your life. And it's really about dialing people into to becoming more of their own advocate, but also their own best friend to establish a relationship with themselves. I also, one of the big things that coming out of our discussion that we're talking about, people waking up, I am putting together a program that's going to be launched in November. It's called I'm Awake Now What? And it's a membership community for people who are awakening because many of us who have awoken sometimes, life has been working fine. Then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from underneath you and it's no longer working fine. And you don't know what to do next. So you're awake because life as you know it was no longer working for you and you don't have a reference point. So a colleague of mine, Cozy Stankakis, and myself are putting together a program that is a community. We meet once a month and there's going to be resources available with tools and um, community and also where people could get questions answered that they may have on their journey as well. And so you could find the link for that on my website, drdoloresfazino.com. If you go to that website, there'll be a I'm Awake Now What button. You could just push on that and you could get more information about it.
I love it. I will make sure to link the website in the description.
Perfect.
This was a lovely conversation. So many
Well,
things
thank
I
you,
could have.
CK.
It's funny because I'm like, I wish you lived in Montreal or I in Southern California because I'm like, let's go for coffee and just shoot the shit for like an hour and have a chat because there's a lot of similarities
Yeah.
between it. But such a great conversation. Thank you very much for coming on my wee little show. But it is my little passion project and I love it. And getting to talk to you has been a blessing. Right? So everybody out there, go check out drdoloresfazino.com. I will link it as well. Pick up the books, tune into the podcast, and totally sign up to I'm Awake Now What. Absolutely, without a doubt. Thank you for being here, and everybody at home, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@ccsims.com or visit ccsims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.